Hello, I'm Chris Matthews, Head of Sustainability at United Utilities and Vice Chair of Greater Manchester's Natural Capital Group. I'm delighted to be speaking at today's conference, albeit for the second year in a very different format from what we're used to. When we look back at the last 12 months or so, there's no doubt it's been a difficult year for many people. But one of the positives perhaps to take from the COVID pandemic is that people have connected more with nature and their local environments. And we've seen that United Utilities as well. We've seen an increase in the number of visitors coming to the catchment land that we own, many of them enjoying it responsibly. Unfortunately, some people behaving in an antisocial manner, but the vast majority of people have enjoyed their visit. And we are creating a connection for those people with nature, the role it plays, and the importance of respecting it. So when it comes to nature at United Utilities, we look at it through the lens of water. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk briefly about too much water, too little water, and water of the right quality, and how we're playing our part to tackle the climate and nature emergencies. And in particular, I'm going to cover four things. The first is the vitally important role that water plays in nature recovery and climate change. Second, an overview of what United Utilities is doing in playing its part. Thirdly, why this matters and the importance of partnership and collaboration. And finally, what some of the risks and opportunities are that are ahead of us. So let's focus on water, climate change and nature. I often say that the water sector itself is one of those most impacted by climate change, particularly from an adaptation point of view. But we don't hear enough about that. Mitigation is important, it matters, of course it does. We need to get our carbon emissions down as far as we can. But I don't hear enough conversations about adaptation. Just think about storms Desmond and Eva in 2015, Storm Christoph this year and the impact it had on places like Northwich. Too much flooding, too much devastation and damage to our communities. Yet we don't hear about those impacts as much as we hear about carbon emission reductions. We need to look at adaptation measures and talk about it more. What is good for water is clearly good for nature and is good for people. And we need to connect those three things and look for solutions. For example, let's think about an urban environment and more sustainable urban drainage solutions, SUDs, where by installing those solutions, we can slow the flow of water. The green spaces that we curate are good for nature, good for habitat, and also they're good for people's health and well-being as well. And in fact, the NHS has estimated that we could save some £2.1 billion every year in treatment costs if everyone in England had access to good quality green space. So we need to make the compelling case and explain that nature, water and climate change are all interlinked and that specific interventions can deliver multiple benefits. So what is United Utilities doing about connecting people and nature and water? Well, there's a couple of things I'm going to share with you today. One, from the perspective of what we're doing ourselves, and the second of what we're doing with others. There's many initiatives we're doing within our organisation. One in particular, wastewater dynamic network management. Sounds complicated. Essentially, it's using technology to collect data from our assets, other people's assets, and the environment, collecting that in real time, transferring it to a central location, and then using predictive analytics to actually identify any changes from normal operation, normal behaviour. And if something has changed, then we can look at that and go and intervene before customers even know there's a problem. And the thing that we're looking for that has changed is basically a loss of volume in the network. That means less capacity. Less capacity, more water goes in from rainfall, more potential flooding risk. So by having this data and using it, we can intervene proactively, reduce flooding risk and ensure that the quality of water in the environment is improved. When we think about what we're doing with others, probably the lead initiative that I would talk to you about is CAST, Catchment Systems Thinking. It's the next generation of our Sustainable Catchment Management Programme, but it takes a much more holistic and wider view of the catchments rather than just upland catchments. And it also takes us to think about natural capital, how we embed that in our decision making, and how we can deliver solutions that are best for the environment, customers and communities, and driving multiple benefits. We've just actually assessed our first applications for our CAST fund. That's £300,000 we made available to Northwest organisations that will focus in two areas, either better connecting people with nature or to look at market mechanisms that will bring investment into nature. Absolutely critical, bringing money into nature. And things that we've been doing in places like the Wye and the petrol catchments, as well as our support for natural course and ignition, both in Greater Manchester and in the North West, is really evidence of the work that we are doing and the support we're giving to embedding natural capital and nature thinking in the way that we do business. Our catchment systems thinking approach, or CAST, that leads me on to the third point, which is why this matters and the importance of partnership and collaboration. I was reading a speech given recently by the Environment Agency's chair, where Emma Howard-Boyd talked about how floods and storms are responsible for almost 3/4 of climate disasters. And for every person affected by flooding, another 16 people are affected by a loss of service such as transport and power. So resilience really does have an impact. Yet, as I said earlier, we're not getting the same airtime. And actually, it doesn't get the same level of investment either. Most of the funding for resilience comes from the public purse. In fact, just 3% of the private finance mobilised under the Paris Agreement went towards adaptation. It's vitally important that that changes. Now, I don't need to make the case to the attendees listening to me that the natural environment, one that thrives, actually mitigates the impact of weather events and saves money. Nature investments, we know, have a high cost-benefit ratio, with £4.60 back for every £1 invested in peatland and £2.80 back for every pound invested in woodland. There's a very strong business case emerging there. For United Utilities, we see that, but it's not a thing we can solve on our own. I often describe it as shared problems requiring shared solutions. And for me, the key challenge is to make people aware of the contribution they can make to these solutions and to want to invest in that and to make a difference through that investment. So it would be much better, wouldn't it, if all beneficiaries into these solutions chipped in and there was a mechanism, a financial instrument that underpins that. I think that's coming. Biodiversity Net Gain, I think, is a great example through the Environment Bill where a market or some sort of mechanism is going to be created. We already can hear from lots of organisations their commitment to want to plant trees. Fantastic, all these trees want to be planted. But for us, let's plant them in the right places, the right type of tree in the right type of place, where actually that tree not only is good for carbon, but it's good for habitat, it's good for water quality, it's good for water quantity. So let's get these trees planted in the right places. So working collaboratively with the plethora of organisations that can help there is really, really important, whether that's Rivers Trust, Wildlife Trust, the RSPB, businesses, combined authorities, local authorities, NGOs. All of us have a part to play in finding solutions, leveraging funds and expertise, and our CAS fund, which I've just mentioned, is an example of that. So what are some of the risks and opportunities that lie ahead of us? Of course, if it was easy, we'd have done it by now, so it clearly isn't. And I just wanted to give a couple of examples of where I think society and the actors within it need to come together to help us become more resilient. If I think about reducing water use, in this country we typically use 140 litres per person per day. In Germany it's something like 110 litres per person per day. That needs to change. We need to take less water from the natural environment. We can do that through building regulations being tightened to ensure that new houses are built to a lower level. And we certainly would want to see regulations that require all new homes to be built with fittings and appliances that do meet a minimum water efficiency label rating. And similarly, when customers and consumers are buying white goods, why haven't we got mandatory water labelling in the same way we have for energy labelling? That allows the consumer to make an informed choice, really important. If I think about sustainable drainage and reducing flood risk and spills from storm overflows, we do need to limit the amount of water flowing into the combined sewer system. At the moment, everybody has that right to connect, and some sewers in the northwest are at or near capacity. The planning system needs to support a better outcome with SUDs, a better control over the approach to it, more enforcement, more resources for enforcement, and we do want to see SUDs embedded in plans for every locality and enforced by the planning system, and in investment plans for the likes of the highways authorities. We do have policy for new build sites, although it could be stronger, but what about the retrofit of SUDs? An opportunity there as well. And then when it comes to embedding nature solutions, we really do want to see these delivering multiple benefits and long-term resilience for climate change. The development of natural capital markets for investments to be co-funded, for example, We want the market to be fully functioning, but really we're still seeing more pilots than that critical mass, so we need to see more players getting involved. Nature-based solutions are better than hard engineering in some cases, offering multiple benefits, long-term resilience, but they are less certain with their outcome and can take time to mature. We need the regulatory mechanisms to respect and appreciate that. And the catchment-based approach does need to become fully operationalised, so we have a single plan for catchments, which is recognised by all stakeholders, is bought into by all stakeholders. But for that to succeed, we need strong governance in place. Just some of the areas where I believe there are risks and opportunities ahead if we want to ensure that nature, climate and water coexist. So by way of conclusion, I'm not going to revisit the key points that I've made. Instead, I just want to highlight one further consideration for you. The pandemic has exposed inequalities in society. I think we can all see that. And in the Northwest, we do have our fair share of socially and economically deprived parts of the region. And we know that those people who live in poor environments tend to have worse health and the lowest incomes, with less access to green space and blue space. Creating and connecting people with those green and blue spaces will actually support new local jobs and will benefit health and well-being. So I think all of us, when we're talking about climate change and nature and water, should make sure that when we're adapting and mitigating to climate change and delivering that nature recovery, we make sure we do so in a way that is fair and inclusive to all.